PHP arrays are very flexible and they're very, very powerful. They're sort of like Python dictionaries, but way better. They're better than Java hash maps. They're associative arrays, basically. Or associative arrays are the notion of key-value pairs, and in PHP they're completely untyped. We'll talk only a little tiny bit about untyped arrays. But associative arrays are very powerful and flexible data structures, especially in a language like PHP that sort of is an untyped language that a variable can take on any old type. So if we think about classic lists, we can make an array. This array has two elements. In this case, we're creating an array named stuff, and high is the first element, and there's the second element. Arrays are zero-based if you're using integer indices, and so sub1 is actually the second thing. So when we print out $stuff sub1, square bracket operators are the lookup or index or sub. I read them as sub. So stuff sub1 is actually the second item. And that's kind of like Python lists if you're familiar with Python. The thing that's like Python dictionaries, and it's the same structure. The array is the array in PHP. We'll get to classes and objects later, but key value arrays are just key value arrays, and you can actually have integer keys inside of an array and string keys and other kinds of keys in arrays all at the same time. We tend not to do that very often because it confuses us, and so we don't want to be confused. And so in this case, the little arrow, I call that maps to. So the key name maps to the value Chuck, and the key course maps to the value WA4E. And then you can look up based on the key, stuff sub course is the way I read that. So that says go in the array stuff, look up the key with the string course, and pull that out. And so it prints out the thing that's in there as web applications for everybody. Arrays can get a little complex. These are super simple ones. And so we need to print them. And there's some very convenient ways to print arrays in PHP. The print_r, I think the R stands for recursive, I don't know, will dump out an array. And if there's arrays within arrays or other things, it prints them out nicely. And if you're doing this in HTML, you want to print out a pre-tag. So pre-tag is the tag that respects new lines. And so there's new lines at the end of each of these things. And so I tend, if I'm going to print it on a web page, print out a pre-tag, print the array, and then print a /pre so that you actually see them. Otherwise, it'll all get run together on a big long line in wrapped, which is readable but not pretty. So I won't show the pre's going forward, but just if you want to print this stuff on a web page, you want to enclose it in a pre-tag. And so again, we can print this stuff, and it's really good for debugging. We can print an array that has integer indices, so sub2 and sub9. Now, the other thing that this kind of shows is that the integer indices do not have to be dense. They do not have to be 0, 1, 2 like a Python list. You can think of them as it's really a key value array, and it has integers as can be keys, and that's it makes perfect sense. There is another way to dump stuff out that's a lot more verbose called var_dump, and I tend to do print R if I'm just looking for what I know is in the array. If I'm a little more concerned about is this an object or whatever, var_dump gives you a lot more detail. It shows you both the the key name maps to a 5-character string with the value Chuck. The key course maps to a 5-character string with the value SI664. And so the var_dump is much more detail, but it's if you know what you're looking for. var_dump also is the one thing that prints out false. One of the hardest things that bugs me, and I've wasted lots of hours in PHP, is printing out false and not seeing it. So false, and if you print it out with an echo statement or a print R, it prints nothing out. So if I'm just going to set the variable thing to false, I echo 1, that comes out. I print R false, and that is nothing. That's the problem here, right? That's the problem here, that nothing prints out. It doesn't say, oh, I'm printing a thing out and it's false. It doesn't say that. So the echo 2 comes out. But var_dump is good because var_dump is not only telling us the type, but it's also telling us the type and value. And so at some level, if I'm printing variables out, if I think they might be false, I tend to use var_dump rather than print. So you can build an array dynamically. You don't have to put all of the stuff in the parentheses in the constructor. You can append to the end of the array, which basically is adding integer indices. So VA and then empty brackets means put it at the end. So stick hello at the end and stick world, and so we end up with 0 and 1 in that particular array. You can also build them up by key values. So you can say, here's my array, stick in subname and stick in subcourse and print it out. So you're building that out. And so it's really often more common to build these arrays up and start with an empty array and then put stuff in it. Or you can use the kind of array parenthesis syntax as well. We have a lot of different ways of looping through arrays. There is sort of a determinant loop, meaning a loop that will go through all the key value pairs. And so here we start out with an array that has two items, a key name maps to Chuck and a key course maps to SI664, and that's in the array. And so the for each is the, give me an array and I'll loop through all the elements in that array. So for each stuff as is part of the key, as a keyword of PHP. And then you have two iteration variables and you mark it this way. This maps to, but $k is an iteration variable and $v is an iteration variable. And it will take on the success, K will take on the successive values for the keys, and simultaneously V will take on the successive values of the V. The V will take on the successive values. And so this loop is going to print out twice, and it's going to print out key and value. Now the interesting thing is, if you're coming from Python dictionaries, the arrays stay in order, and we'll see later we can sort them, etc. And so it's deterministic that we put name in before course, and so name comes out and course comes out second. Name comes first and course comes second. Whatever order you put them in, PHP maintains that order. If you do a indexed array with a for each, the k ends up being the integer, right? The key is the integer, and it will do a for each loop and go through and give you the index position. Remember that unlike Python, you have to, Python lists have to be compacted, meaning no gaps, but you can have gaps in PHP arrays. You can build a counted loop, and this counted loop is basically the for loop has, an initial position, a check to see when to stop the loop, and then a change. And we talked about this in the previous lecture. So because arrays are zero-based, for I equals 0, I less than count of stuff, I plus plus. So that means that I is going to be 0, 1, 2, whatever, until we get past count of stuff. And count of stuff is 2, and that's why we say less than here, because we can't look at the sub 2 element. We can look at the sub 0 element and the sub 1 element, and then we just index and pull the stuff out, $i. Now this counted loop assumes that it's compact, or no gaps. Right, because that's if we're generating, if you could in here you could have an element 2 and an element 4, and this would not work. But the for each loop would work. The previous for each loop, this would work if the values were, if the positions were 2 and 4. Now you wouldn't get it if you built the array this way. You know that this is going to position 1, that's going to be 0 and 1. So this will always work. This would only work if you absolutely knew that the array was compacted and started from 0 and went up with no gaps. You can make arrays of arrays. We don't think of these as two-dimensional arrays. We think of this outer array as this outer array from here to here has 3 elements, and one has a key of paper. First element is paper, pens, and MISC, and it just maps to, and then this is a constant. So from here to here is another array, and from here to here is another array, and then from here to here is another array. And if you want to grab something out of the middle of it, you can say products sub pens. Well, you can think of this right here. That little expression is this array right here. So that is an array. And if you just printed that out, you would print that array out. Oh, Echo doesn't print it very well. Print R would be better to print that out. And then you can say sub marker, and then that goes into here. And so sub marker gets this string, and so that's what prints out as markers. Okay, so that's how arrays of arrays work. They're not really kind of two-dimensional arrays in the classic sense, and what you'll find after a while is that have arrays that have arrays, or objects that have arrays, or arrays that have objects, and we create rather complex data structures, especially when we're doing with things like talking to web services and pulling data structures across the web. They're often pretty complex, a mix of arrays and objects. And so up next we're going to talk about array functions.